Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D Brief. This is the D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's arts
and entertainment scene.
This is the D
Brief.
Hello and welcome to the D Brief, Detroit's Arts and Entertainment Podcast. I am your co-host, Seth Resler.
And I'm Becky Scarcello. Hello.
And it's not actually a podcast anymore, is it?
It's not. What do we call it?
It may be. I think we're calling it a live stream now. I think that's what it is. This is the second week we've been doing this. We had this Detroit Arts and Entertainment Podcast that we've been doing for over 2 years now, looking at everything that's going on in the Detroit arts and entertainment scene. And then, of course, the pandemic and the lockdown and everything happened. And we didn't know what to do. So we just hit the pause button, because all of a sudden there was no Detroit arts and entertainment scene, or at least not one that anybody could go out and see and experience. And after a couple months of that, we said, well, let's do something. And so we are now bringing it back as this live stream video that is happening every Tuesday at 5:00. And the more we do it, the more the world throws stuff in front of it and makes it more and more difficult.
I got to tell you. Yes.
How you doing?
I didn't know how to answer last week, and I really don't know how to answer now.
It's not meant to be a loaded question, but it is.
It is. I you know what? And I'm sad. I'm angry. I'm confused. I'm upset. I'm so many things that I know I want to do something with, that I want to channel. And I know we need to be speaking out now. And I know I want justice. I want to work towards justice. And I'm just trying to process all that sadness, all that anger, all that frustration, all that, like my heart and my head just hurt for the world.
I'll add something to that list of things that you said there. I'm tired.
Very exhaustion. Yeah.
And not the kind of, I didn't get enough sleep tired.
No.
I'm just sort of tired of the news, tired of everything that's going on in the world, tired of, seeing no end in sight, not knowing how long it's going to continue to go on, or what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think I will add to that. Today, I feel some sense of hope. I didn't quite have that before, and I feel like I've seen some really amazing scenes of solidarity, some peacefulness, some really intelligent conversation, some people apologizing for things that I would have never thought would come out. I feel this sense of like, maybe this is it. Like maybe this will change things. I don't know, but I'm feeling that glimmer of hope. And so that is positive in my mind.
I will say it comes and goes for me in waves.
Definitely.
I will say the weather is a factor.
Yes.
That I do better when it's a day like today where it's really nice out, as opposed to days where it's not. I will say there is something, I don't know why it is. I am working from home, and yet somehow Mondays feel even more Monday-ish than they did when I had to go into the office. That the motivation comes and goes in waves, and there are times where it is tough to get stuff done.
It is. And when you feel like the problems are so monumental and stuff that has gone on for just far too long, I really feel like you got to take time to reflect on it and think on it. I know nature helps me a lot, to your point about the weather too, but any kind of weather, if I just try to get out and walk around, around trees and animals and plants, I think that helps a lot. And I think people need to take care of themselves so that they, how you take care of yourself translates to how you can take care of others. So,
yeah. So you and I were talking at the end of the last week, and we were saying, who are we going to get on to be a guest next week?
Right.
And it became, because this is supposed to be a fun, lighthearted arts and entertainment show, right. But there's so much heavy stuff going on in the world, and we needed somebody who could speak to that, but also talk about arts and entertainment. And we weren't sure who to get. And then you had a brilliant idea, and we extended an invitation to her, and she said yes. So I'm really thrilled with the guest that we've got on today.
Me too.
She's a national treasure, and she is just a woman that's incredibly well respected as a journalist. She spent nearly 20 years as a columnist at the Detroit Free Press. She had a nationally syndicated column. She's the editor of a book called The Burden: African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. She's in the North Carolina Media and Journalism Hall of Fame. She's in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and just recently became the director of arts and culture for the city of Detroit. Want to welcome to the show, Rochelle Riley.
Thank you very much.
We should point out that
Hi, Becky.
Short list of things that you have done.
I won't be able to wear the earphones if you kept going. It's like, okay.
The show's only half an hour.
Okay.
Right.
Welcome. I'm so glad that you could be here today. I guess where I want to start is here. I mean, I'm obviously a white male who lives in the suburbs of Detroit. I'm not from this area. I know you're not originally from here either, but you've been living here decades longer than I have. And I suspect that, given that we have different backgrounds, given that we've had different experiences, that there can be times where we're both looking at the same thing and maybe seeing different things, that maybe you see some things that I don't see. And so I'm curious because we're all looking at the same things right now. We're looking at, what happened in Minneapolis. We're looking at the reaction to it around the country and even around the world. We're looking at the display that we saw at the White House yesterday. What are you seeing? What do you think's important to it? And what might you be seeing that maybe I'm not seeing?
The biggest difference, and this is the way I try to explain it to people, when Officer Derek Chauvin jammed his knee against a man's neck and ground him into the ground until he died, what you would never look at that scene and be able to see is a family member of yours being treated that way. I woke up in a cold sweat because I had a nightmare where it was my brother's face against the pavement. That's the type of terror, empathetic terror, that happens every time there's an incident like that. Every time someone has been killed, every time someone has had a situation happen. And it doesn't just happen in one place. It happens all over the place. It's happened for a long time. I was in Louisville before I came to Detroit, and there were two horrible shootings of innocent people there by police. One woman who was in her bed and they stormed into her house. It was the wrong house, trying to get a guy who they thought was a bad guy who was already in custody, and they shot and killed her. And then they killed a very popular barbecue stand owner who fed people all over the city and was a staple of the community. They thought somebody shot at them, and they fired shots at a crowd and killed him. These are not things that you would wake up one morning and go, oh God, I wonder if that's going to happen to somebody I know today. But everybody that I know who's Black knows that that is a possibility.
I had a moment. My girlfriend is Black, and we go out every year to Sleeping Bear Dunes.
Mm-hmm.
We camp there in the fall. And the first time we went, you got to get gas between here and there. And I am used to pulling over wherever when the tank is low enough, and we go in and I get the gas. And there were certain places where she was uncomfortable getting out of the car and walking into the gas station. She said, no, you do that. And that was an eye-opening moment for me, that and she'll say that to me. She'll say there are certain things that you don't even think about.
In the opener where you talked about just being tired because we have so much going on that's weighing us down, Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a civil rights icon, said famously one time, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that's where so many people are now. But for the first time ever, and I'm talking about 67, 68, 92, all the times there have been any types of protests or demonstrations or riots because of something that horrible has happened. This is historic. This is the biggest, because this was such a flagrant attack, not since men were lynched at the turn of the last century and for a few years past that, has there been such a public moment where someone was killed. And people could see that. People watched that. I had friends to call me who are white who said, I think I understand now for the first time ever I couldn't be upset with that because I love my friends, but where have you been?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of that, and I've certainly heard some backlash to people that maybe are posting things on social media that you never would have seen post about race before. Or, and you know, some people are saying, "Well, where you been all these years?" And I certainly feel that too. Like, have you never educated yourself? Have you never talked? Have you this stuff has been going on forever. It's just you cannot ignore it anymore when it's videotaped on everyone's phone and splashed in real time. But then again, you know what? If this is what it takes people to come to the table, then welcome. Come on in and talk about it. So I hope that we can come together, even if some people are coming from a more ignorant place than others, but if they're coming to the table, I hope that can, I don't know, create the tipping point somehow more so.
Michelle, what's your reaction as you're watching, not the initial incident, but the reaction to it, the protests that are happening everywhere? What's going through your mind?
I'm not surprised by any of it. The thing I'm concerned about is the people who have decided to take advantage of this to do harm. I'm talking, guys, I was just talking to a friend of mine who works for the city who was marching with teenagers last night. Just, that's what he does. He's out in the streets. He's checking things out. He works for the mayor. And they saw some people that obviously were not protesting, were not upset, didn't even know who Mr. Floyd was, who had earpieces and walkie-talkies. And they were there to do harm. They were there to vandalize, to make people not like the protesters, to lead someone like the Mississippi prosecutor who said she hopes the coronavirus kills the protesters. I don't know if she still has a job now. That was a few hours ago. But the shame of it is, even in anguish and anger, when you're trying to get people's attention, there are people who are going to try and step on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of ugliness out there. And what do you think about the protests and what it will lead to? How long do you envision this going on, and how do you feel about how the media is covering it, and also how the media is being targeted?
Well, the protests, and sorry, every now and again I have to contain myself. So the protests are necessary.
Yeah.
There have been plenty of these instances, and had these protests not happened, it would have been taken a longer bit of time to forget it, because it was seen. And thank God for that 17-year-old kid who filmed that whole thing. Because of her video, one officer has been arrested. But what I can't figure out is why Minneapolis authorities keep asking, how long are the protests going to go on, when they haven't arrested the other 3 officers? I was horrified. I was horrified by the initial video. I literally lost it when the video came out, 2 days later, that showed the 3 cops on his back on the other side of the car. It was almost like somebody hit me in the chest. And, you don't need a prosecutor's permission to make an arrest. That police chief needs to be fired. What they do is they arrest them on suspicion of, who knows, assault or involuntary manslaughter. But you do something, but you don't let them just walk around while you try to figure out if they did something wrong when someone died. So they'll be going on at least as long as those guys are charged. Firing them was not enough when you kill somebody.
I agree. And I think even just standing by and letting that happen is crime enough.
Well, that's why the one officer who was just sort of standing there with his hands in his pockets and occasionally turned around because he couldn't stand to look, he was fired too, but that's not enough either. He should be charged.
Exactly. And I think that's the point too, that people saw that it actually made a difference. He was not fired until the protests happened. Oh,
absolutely. And he would not have been fired. The first fake autopsy said that Mr. Floyd did not die of asphyxiation. And of course, the autopsy that came out today said what everybody knew, that he was strangled to death. So it's a horrible situation. It's a situation that's played out a lot. And I think the most hopeful thing is that people around the world are paying attention. There are protests in countries around the world. The National Guard has been called out in more than 20 cities. It can't be ignored this time.
Yeah. Let me ask about that, because, I think Becky and I are both people who want to show support. And I have protested more than once over the last couple of years. I've been out there marching in places. The reason I haven't this time is frankly because of the pandemic and what's going on. And we watch the news and we see all those people, gathering out there. And on the one hand, it's great to see that people are responding this way. On the other hand, the thought that keeps going through my mind is that looks like a COVID-19 just germ farm happening right there. And so I worry about that.
I can tell you that for years, when people protested, they faced danger, whether it was dogs or water hoses or police officers beating them up. I want everybody out there to wear a mask, but what they're doing is just taking a different risk to make the point. I just wish everybody would wear a mask, at the very least, to do that. But protesters have always been attacked by something. So it's not dogs or water hoses, it's tear gas, rubber bullets, and Corona. My hope is that this won't go on much longer, and forget the Minneapolis police. Federal authorities will arrest the other officers, and that will help at least dissipate this. Mr. Floyd's funeral is coming up, and that will either cause a second wave of protests, or people will feel like it's time to start moving to the next thing, and that's what do we do to stop this from happening? And the only way to stop it is for every police department in the country to get rid of its bad cops. They know who they are. They have dozens of complaints. They've beaten people up. They've gotten away with it. They need to get rid of them. Yeah. It's a simple request.
Yeah, it seems to me it's one of those to serve and protect. I mean, that is a high order. And so there's no room for negative ones. Like one bad apple is too many, you know, and these officers that finally get fired or arrested, and you see they have 15, 16, 17, 18 counts against them with major infractions. And then
they go and work, and then they go and work for another department.
Yeah. They just get moved around.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, as a journalist, how do you feel about the media coverage of not only the protests, but also sort of in the context of the pandemic?
The most important thing that has to happen is that the media not make itself the story. I know that's hard to not do when you're being attacked, being arrested. We've seen several instances of just things that you never would have seen in years past. You know, the Fourth Estate is the Fourth Estate. You're not going to be beaten up or hit with, rubber bullets or arrested. And those things are happening. And those things are directly related to the campaign by the White House to discredit the media and to make people hate the media and to make people not trust them to do anything. So I think there are two things that are happening. The media are doing their job despite that, and people are seeing that. But they have to be very careful not to talk too much about what's happening to them, because while that's a part of the job and that is terrible, you don't want people to feel like you're whining because you've chosen to be where you are. My friends who are out there, I pray for them every night, but I take pictures of them as I see them on television. But you're not there to be the story. You're there to tell the story and make sure that people can see what's happening. And they're doing a fine job.
You're in an unusual situation in that you have been a journalist, but you now work for City Hall. And I realize that you're not in there with the police department every day, but are there things that you see in your role now that, you wish journalists would know, or vice versa, things that because you spent time as a journalist that you wish people at City Hall understood?
Well, I can't tell you that.
Insider info.
I can tell you that there are lots of things that the city does right that you think as journalists, everything they're doing, and you don't. And I have been stunned and pleasantly surprised by some of the hard work, not some of the hard work, all of the hard work that I see them doing. But there are also things that I have seen with my colleagues that have been interesting. So it's just a matter of where your perspective is. For me, I think that's that, daily dance that people have done for years when you're covering government. You have to hold government accountable. You have to hold reporters accountable. And there are going to always be people who are unhappy.
I was watching, I've started watching the local news channels because I can pull them up through my Roku. And so I was watching Atlanta the other night. And the one thing that stood out to me is that the local Atlanta television journalists kept saying, this shouldn't be violent. This isn't the way to do it. That really this is about, it's fine to protest, but it needs to be peaceful. And then we need to take care of this at the ballot box, by voting. And I was struck by that because, on the one hand, I want to agree. And on the other hand, I feel like we've tried peaceful protest. The guy who I keep thinking about is Colin Kaepernick, who this is exactly what he was talking about. And nobody seemed to want to listen. They kept trying to change the subject. And so, and it also just seemed like it ignored the fact that there have been a lot of campaigns to try and suppress votes and try to keep people from voting. And so I was surprised to see the local media just talk about how this isn't the way to do this, this should be solved at the ballot box. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I miss the days when journalists didn't say what should and should be happening. I was in the business for a long time. I remember Walter Cronkite when I was a kid telling you just the way it was, and that was it. I think that there are too many commentators and not enough reporters who just literally report on what happens. And that is part of why people don't necessarily trust the media, because everybody's got an opinion instead of a story. I don't think you can continue to tell people who have been victimized for centuries how they get to be upset.
Right.
So exactly. It's not their job to say, this is how you should do it. It's your job to tell people why they're doing it.
One of the things that I've struggled with in the course of this is, like I mentioned, my girlfriend is Black, and she's been watching the news coverage nonstop for days. And it's clearly affecting her in a way that I sort of understand intellectually, but I don't share the same experience. And obviously I'm not targeted in the same way that she is. And I find myself, and to be clear, I'm not very good at the normal everyday man-woman stuff that you're supposed to say. So,
no, really?
So this is, even way more difficult. Like I don't know what to say in those kinds of things, and I'm flailing and not doing particularly well. I mean, do you have any advice for me?
Are you looking for love advice, Seth?
No, it doesn't necessarily need to be love advice, but
let me just say that the most important thing that anyone can do when they're trying to comfort someone whose shoes they can never walk in is to just listen, to just be there. You don't really have to say anything. But people have been trying for 400 years to be heard. And I think that we now have a moment in this country where people are hearing the complaints that are not new. The incidents are not new that they've been complaining about, but people are seeing it. There's been this eye-opening moment where people are going, oh my God, so that's what they were talking about. So just be available to listen and understand that this is the way we live. This is what we live with. As Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said in this wonderful essay that he wrote for the Los Angeles Times, Black people have been in a burning building for all of this time, and racism is the ash that, everybody else can just dust off, but we're burning.
I think that's a really important point, and I've tried to decide, like, what do I say on social media? What do I say to friends? And I kind of came to that same conclusion. Well, I think I just need to listen a lot right now. And I've tried to educate myself, but there's always more. And I hope something that comes out of it is it's so easy to get information.
Yes.
There is no excuse. Books like yours, so many podcasts, so many books, so much is out there that you cannot say you don't know anymore. And so I know my personal challenge to myself is to find out all that I can, because I will never know what it means to be Black, but I sure as hell can try and empathize. And I know that it's what's happening is wrong. So learning more is just way to get greater understanding. And I think that's really powerful, because I think people, maybe when they're conversing, even they try to empathize, they try to, oh, you had that experience, well, I had this, try to make, and you don't need to always try and equal someone to relate.
A lot of that. But I do want to say, you don't have to know what it is to be Black. You have to know what it is to be hurt. And if you can remember something that was horrible for you, and somebody who's Black is telling you, this is horrible for me, imagine what you felt like and share that feeling. Don't try to, because it'll never work if you're trying to feel what somebody's feeling when you can't.
Right.
But you can feel hurt or pain or know when something is wrong and say, I know what wrong looks like and I understand how you feel.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was watching the PBS NewsHour last night, and there was this moment about 20 minutes in where Judy Woodruff did this transition, and she said, in other news, the COVID-19 pandemic, and I was thinking that that's where we are in the world right now, is that the global pandemic is
stunning?
single worldwide.
It's one of the B and C stories now instead of
right. It's not even the top story anymore. But I do want to talk about the pandemic, and I want to talk about what you're doing in your new role as a director of arts and culture for the city of Detroit, and how the pandemic is actually affecting the arts and entertainment scene and the culture scene here in Detroit.
Well, as you know, my office is new, had not existed for over 20 years, and my main goal, first and foremost, is to make sure that people understand how important our creative arts community is. It's an industry. Nationally, the creative arts contribute more to the gross national product than the auto industry. That's probably true locally, except nobody's bothered to check. So my job is to make sure people know how important the arts are. As the mayor is working on the big COVID and the big census and all of those things, my microcosm of that is to do that for the arts community, to make sure people know that they're a part of the workforce, that when everything got shut down, artists and musicians who lost their jobs need to eat just like anyone else, need to pay their kids tuition just like anybody else, need to be able to stay in their homes instead of losing their homes. So I'm an advocate for artists and arts organizations, and it's one of the best jobs I've ever had, although I've only had 2 jobs because I've always been a journalist, but I would not have taken any other second job except this one.
How is it different? I mean, what do you see and what do you do now that you didn't do as a journalist?
For the first time in my life, I can be an advocate for things publicly. I can talk about the president. I can say somebody's a good candidate. I can raise money for causes. As a journalist, you know, literally, you can't do anything. You can't ask for money. You can't violate ethical rules. You can't. It's all about just being a storyteller and being a reporter and being the eyes and ears for someone. Now I'm an advocate for someone, so I can fight for. So I can go I went to court with an artist to make sure they didn't get evicted from their home because it's one of the art houses that I'm trying to help support. It's wonderful to be an advocate and to be able to do it in a way that I could go farther than I could as a journalist.
Well, and part of that advocacy is the storytelling. So
yes.
It's perfect. Yeah.
It's like I continue my day job, but I get to do all these other things too.
Mm-hmm.
So walk us through a typical day. I mean, I don't know if they're any typical because of everything that's going on, but walk us through a day right now. What are you working on?
I am partnering with everybody in the city on everything. When I took this job, there was no budget and I had no staff. I now have an assistant who is a chief of staff, office manager, deputy director, and amazing person. And between the two of us, we have managed to create a plan for the city. We have managed to partner on several projects, including the largest mural installation in the city. We partnered on the public sculpture that's going to be in front of the TCF Center. We partnered on a telethon to raise money for artists who, quite frankly, needed the $500 grants we were giving out because that can make the difference between making your rent or not. We have partnered with folks who are trying to hold events virtually. Everything possible that we can do. But you ain't seen nothing yet because I actually got my first budget passed. I felt like I made an A.
Oh,
so
great.
Congratulations.
So thank you so much. So there are going to be some things that hopefully we can do post. There's never going to not be COVID-19, but post the pandemic of it, how do we get back into arts and culture and not lose what we don't want to lose? That means we have to open up some of our venues so we don't lose places to go, not just restaurants, but places to dance and places to watch the opera and places to watch the DSO. All of these things are important to us. We want to make sure that our city treasure survives. So I'm helping with that. But the most important task that I have that the mayor gave me is to plan the citywide memorial for the souls that we've lost to COVID. I'm working on that. He's asked me to handle the planning of it. It is literally the most important thing I'll probably do in my life.
Wow. And what does that look like? When will that be?
We'll be making an announcement soon.
Okay.
Yes.
We don't get the breaking
I can't
news.
give you that scoop yet because
That's
I am
okay.
waiting for waiting for the mayor.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Can we talk about the performing arts? Because I feel like
Yes.
those are the ones that are particularly hard hit because people can't go out and see them. I mean, just today I got in my email a email from Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle,
Mhm.
and it was a survey. And it was
Mhm.
basically like, hey, when are you coming back? And what do you need? And what are you worried about? And, as Becky knows, I've spent a lot of time over there.
Yep.
In fact, we were just given by a very faithful listener parking passes right across the street.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Came in the mail after the lockdown started, but we're very grateful for that. And I had to fill out the survey, and I'm like, you know what? This is not something I need to be doing soon.
I filled that out too. Yeah.
I can tell you, for me, I want to make sure that the places that I go survive, and I encourage everyone else to do that. So my favorite restaurant, I get takeout once a week to make sure that, I'm eating their food. I got masks for them because it was a great gift that I could do. I think that there will be a way for us to eventually go back in some way, but I'm not going to do anything before the mayor says it, and he's not going to do anything before the governor says it. And my favorite thing to do is to go to a movie theater and see a movie. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a big screen kind of person. Every week. That has been very hard for 3 months to not do that. But that doesn't mean I'm not watching them. I went to On Demand so I could see Tracy Ellis Ross's new film, The High Note, and I was $19.99. I said, "What the heck?" And I went, "That's what I would have spent if I'd gone to a Magic."
Exactly.
So I got it, and I ate my own popcorn, and I watched it, and it was great. So
yeah,
my
favorite thing to do is go to concerts.
Yes.
And be packed in and dancing and singing along. And that, I think, is going to be some of the last things to be able to come back. And, our musicians, how do we support them? I mean, I think there's definitely this Zoom fatigue, these virtual event fatigue. And I think there needs to be awareness, like we need to still pay them for entertaining us.
I think what we have to do is start using Zoom in a way that means we care about them instead of it being the best way to see a concert. So whether you're I'm fatigued with Zoom and 9 Zoom. By the way, what's a typical day? 9 Zoom calls about everything. But I would pay to hear a concert sitting here in my home if it's going to mean that person or that band or whoever that performer is going to be okay. And we're looking at some things like that now just to make sure our venues and our performers don't go do other things and not come back.
Right.
Where are the calls for those types of things made? Is that made at the city level, the county level, the state level? Who decides that you can only go to 25% capacity or that you have to have such and such in place?
Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
And so it's coming from that level.
She is doing a fantastic job. She's leading the state, and it's what she says. And I'm not doing anything she doesn't say because she is she is literally doing this in as responsibly a way as possible without being bullied by people who just don't seem to care that there's a pandemic.
So then as it relates to the pandemic, what are the decisions that are being made at the city level?
The city is following the governor's lead. When she says, okay, restaurants can open at 50% capacity, as she did yesterday or today, that means restaurants in Detroit will be opening at 50% capacity. And people in mask who want to go out and eat will be able to go to their restaurants and be spaced out and have their meals. I will support my restaurant by ordering the food and picking it up at the curb. But the main thing is that the restaurant survives.
Well, and I'm in the same boat as you, which is that I want the restaurant to survive, but I'm not feeling like I'm ready to go in and sit down at a restaurant anytime soon.
It is a personal choice. And there are lots of people who are ready. I'm glad for them. I want them to do it if they're comfortable. I just want them to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. I want them to just be safe and do it because you want to go. Just be safe doing it. And I will eventually go back. And I love hanging with drunk strangers at concerts.
Me too.
I have partied with some of the best people that I've never seen again ever. But but I have to just be safe,
Well, I do think some personal responsibility comes into it. And with any kind of privilege, any kind of power comes responsibility. And I think that we cannot lose that personal responsibility.
That's the most important thing. These guys who don't want to wear masks because they're free, be free at home.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Becky.
I was just going to say, I don't want to leave this conversation with more. I touched on it, but without more talk about your book.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yes. So, it's called The Burden of African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. So, beautiful cover
Thank
too.
you.
And this happens to be a copy that you signed for me when I bought it at the bookshop and heard you speak about it. And I think it fits really well. I read this, what, like a year ago? Did it come
Mhm.
out? Yeah. But it was an important part of my education. And I encourage people to look because it's a collection of essays, all from Black perspective, but in different sort of nuances of things. But if you could tell our audience a little bit about it and what your inspiration was.
Gosh, 3 or 4 years ago, it must have been 4 years now, this columnist who has since been retired from the Pittsburgh paper wrote a column saying that he didn't understand why Black people were always angry. And, they were better off in America than had they stayed in Africa, which let me know two things. He didn't know anybody Black and he'd never been to Africa. But I was so angry by the idea of this, that people don't think slavery still has any lingering effect, that I wrote a Facebook post because, you don't attack columnists don't attack each other. So I didn't write a column, but I wrote a Facebook post. But the response was so great. I said, oh, I should do something bigger than that. Maybe I'll just write an essay. And then I said, no, an essay is not big enough. I'll write a book. Well, when you're a full-time columnist, who has time to write a book except Leonard Pitts, who writes like a bunch of them, and Mitch Albom, who writes a bunch more. But I started it and I said, I've been a columnist for a while and I know how I feel. But I want people to hear this from other people. If I can create a chorus of voices, this choir of voices about this issue, maybe people will finally pay attention. So my first call was to Leonard Pitts, and he was working on his book, and he said, I'll put it aside and write something. And then I called Nicole Hannah-Jones and asked her to write the foreword, and she said yes. And it went on like that until I had 23 essays, counting mine. Not one of them was from the same perspective or the same topic.
Right.
That's how pervasive it is.
Oh,
So
yeah, that was very striking to me. And you don't lose the reader at all because it's like, okay, now let me hear from somebody else. And just, I don't want to say evidence, but just like time and time and time again, and the writing's really thoughtful and it's so pervasive, so insidious that, it just helped me know a little bit more. And I commend you for putting that together.
Thank you. The title comes from the burden that African Americans have carried, but that America did not understand that it's carrying too. And until we put this burden down and deal with each other differently, we're going to always have race problems, which makes no sense for the greatest country in the world.
Absolutely. And it's not like you can expect Black people to solve the problems.
Some people do. Some people do.
Yeah. I mean, we need to come together. It's all of our problem.
Yes.
Can I ask about another issue that you have explored in your work, which is trauma and the impact that it has on children? And I know a lot of that work you did before the pandemic started. Does that inform how you think about this pandemic and how it's going to affect children at all?
Absolutely. There's very little trauma training for teachers. There's very little understanding of how traumatized children are. So imagine if you're dealing with children who are already behind, but they're traumatized by whatever is going on in their lives, and it's harder to teach them. Now add the pandemic on top of that. This is why you have so many kids who are not prepared to move to the next level, to do the next level of testing. And year after year, we would write a front page story about how Detroit children's scores were the lowest in the nation on these standardized tests. And then we do nothing. And then the next year we'd write that same story and we do nothing. We write that same. It's like, there's nothing wrong with these children's brains. What is happening is they're being traumatized. They're not being given the same education as kids in other school districts. And we're blaming them because they get to third grade and they can't read. So now you want to hold them back. I talked to one teacher who said their whole elementary school was going to become a third grade school because they weren't going to be able to pass any of the third graders because they weren't reading at grade level. We have not dealt with that. That's a whole nother pandemic. We have not dealt with that for decades and decades. And until we do, I don't want you to ask me why kids are dropping out of school. I don't want you to ask me about unemployment rates if you didn't do anything for that kid for 12 years before all of that happened.
Right.
Well, and I think even more than 12 years, really from birth. I mean, we have so much brain evidence about trauma and how it affects the very youngest.
That first 4 years is vital.
It's so pivotal, and how it creates such a fight or flight response, if you have unresolved trauma. So it's
Thank
huge.
you for mentioning that. That's one of the most important things I've done too. And I appreciate that I did that as a part of a Pulliam project, that I was awarded a grant to do it. Otherwise, I don't know that I would have been able to.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need that kind of funding to continue
Absolutely.
that and find solutions. I know Matrix Human Services that I'm involved with, and you
They do great work.
you
Yes.
supported us very much throughout the years. And it's so impactful when you get that kind of information, and the knowledge is power, but then where's the steps to start changing?
I do want to say thanks to Dr. Nikolai Vitti for recognizing this and getting some grants to get started doing this, but he's not given a third, a tenth of what he needs.
Right.
So hopefully one day people will get it and they will do it.
Another way that we're seeing the pandemic hit the city is in terms of local media. And look, I work with radio stations all over the country. You've been working at newspapers your entire life. Local media was in trouble before this happened. What is the impact that this is having on local news outlets?
Well, I know that we need to stop using the word pandemic, but corporations have killed newspapers. They have taken over television stations. And I think that by the time we're done, nobody's going to believe a whole lot of everybody sort of gravitates to who they believe, which means we don't really have the type of authoritative news sources that everybody turns to. When there were 3 channels, literally 3 networks when I was a kid, you were either a CBS person, an NBC person, or an ABC person, and the news was the news. Now there's 7,000 ways to get your news, and you believe whoever you like or who feels the way you do, which means you don't know half of what's going on. Some of the stuff that I read that people truly believe that is nonsense, they think is news, they think it's true, and it guides their actions. I don't know how you get that back except going back and starting from the beginning with small newspapers that do their jobs of, telling the news that means something to the people in their community, and television stations that take over in small arenas, not the top 50 markets, but little television stations that talk about what the city council is doing or what the school district needs, instead of if it bleeds, it leads, and whatever the big news is, and 19 hours of stories about Donald Trump taking a walk to a church with an upside down Bible.
Is that going to take a new revenue model? Like, what's that going to look like?
It's going to take a new revenue model. It's going to take a new tact, and it's going to take a long time. There are already revenue models that are starting where they've decided they're not going to be the old newspaper and they're not going to be a television network. And it's just a matter of whether people support them.
Are there ones that you particularly like or gravitate towards? Or
I'm still evaluating.
Okay.
I look at it, but I still believe in the newspapers that do well. I still think there are sources and there's reporting that's amazing. And when that reporting happens, I share it, I tweet it, I let people know. People can follow me at Rochelle Riley, and you'll see the types of things that I think are vital. There are some news sources that I will never share anything that they do because I don't trust them. And I don't think that Fox is a news network, it's Fox Entertainment. So you'll never see that on my Twitter feed.
Yeah.
To that end, Rochelle, about ways we can get involved and, do something proactive. Now that you can be an advocate.
Yes.
Yes. What are some organizations within Detroit that you feel, really could benefit from people's funds right now when you're talking about race relations?
I think the most important things happening right now are making sure that people can eat and have a place to stay. So all of the housing and fund efforts, oh my God, I can't think of the name of my friend Kirk May's Forgotten Harvest.
Great, sure.
Forgotten Harvest, making sure that people can get food. Some of the housing efforts, people don't understand that if you're homeless, you can't, quarantine. You can't. So the efforts that the city is making to make sure that the homeless have some place to be tested, to be safe, those are it. And then, quite frankly, I have to be a little selfish and say, how are you getting through this quarantine? If you've been in your house for 3 months and you're not listening to music or watching TV or, streaming films, right, I think you're a liar. So we want to make sure that we've got some arts and entertainment happening on the other side of this. And I would ask people to consider donating to the Detroit Arts Fund, which I was allowed to create for the first time ever to try and make sure that we are never without an Office of Arts and Culture, so that we can continue to have those things that make us joyful as well as those things that make us whole.
And where do people find that?
You can come to detroitmi.gov/ACE, detroitmi.gov/ACE, or detroitartsandculture.com. They go to the same place.
Perfect.
And they can call me at 313-720-1016. I give my cell phone number to everybody in the state. And it's fine because people don't believe they can actually call. It's
No,
hilarious.
I was going to say I can vouch for it. I've texted you on it.
You know, yeah.
Yeah.
All those late night texts are from you, Becky.
Well,
Just a couple of them.
yeah.
Let me ask about a couple of other things that you're involved with.
Sure.
Tell us about Letters to Black Girls.
My friend Tamara Winfrey Harris, who's an amazing author in Indianapolis, wrote a book called The Sisters Are All Right. There's nothing wrong with Black women. But she started to think that she needed to talk more to young Black girls. So she did this workshop where she asked friends of hers and different women that she knew, write me some letters that I can give to these girls. And she went and she actually handed them, real written letters with words of encouragement, telling them how special they were. And the moment was so amazing. She called and told me about it. And I went, well, you're not going to just stop there, are you? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, that's a thing. That's something that needs to happen over and over. And she said, oh my God, you're right. So we started asking people for letters everywhere so we could get 12 million of them to give to girls around the country. And she decided, well, I think I'll write a book and feature some of the letters so that will get people to give us even more. So her book, it's coming out right after my next book, which I hope we'll mention in a minute, called Letters to Black Girls. And she's taken some of the best letters, including one from me. And it's a book to encourage young Black girls. And at the end, it tells people about the Letters to Black Girls project, where we're collecting letters to travel the country and give them to girls. We want to put in their hands something they can hold to their heart that lets them know that they are valued and they are loved.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's such an important point about seeing yourself in things like this.
Yes.
Speaking of art, one of my passions is all the mural art around
Yes.
the city.
Oh, yes. Well, you
And,
see, Kiki's right behind me.
Yes,
Can you
exactly.
tell? There it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was admiring it before we came on. And, it's so powerful when throughout art history, you haven't seen yourself in the paintings. You haven't seen yourself on museum walls. So I think that is a really cool thing that's going on in the city that really should be amplified as well, is that we need to represent everyone in our arts and entertainment.
I have amazing ideas for youth arts that I'm hoping we can start in this post-pandemic era.
Well, let us know. We'll have you come back
Definitely.
on and talk about it. Yeah.
I absolutely will.
So the other project, and you alluded to this, is That They Lived. Tell us what that is.
It's a book for young readers. This is a collection of essays that I wrote. There was a woman outside of Seattle who posted pictures of her daughter, her 4-year-old daughter, dressed as famous and important Black women every day of Black History Month. And this was a couple of years ago. And people were mesmerized. She made the front pages of papers. She got to meet some of the famous people that her daughter dressed as. I thought, God, these are women that every child should know. And I think I want to write some stories to go with them. So I flew out to Seattle, got in a car and drove to Kent, met her at her house and told her I wanted to do it. And she said, sure. And voila, we have That They Lived, African Americans who changed the world. And as you can see from the cover, that's her daughter Lola in the center as Rosa Parks. And that's my grandson, Caleb, who on one side is Thurgood Marshall, on the other side is W.E.B. Du Bois.
That's awesome. And so when do we see that?
February of 2021.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So the paperback edition of The Burden comes out in August, and this book comes out in February, which means I'm going to be very busy for the next year.
Yeah, you were so more productive than I am during this pandemic.
I know. I did not write a book.
Not get half this.
But you still can. You still got a few weeks to do it.
Well,
right.
and to that note, I just got to shout out, support local bookstores.
Yes.
All right. Well, speaking of shout outs, let's do that. All right, this is something that we like to do every show. Is we like to give a shout out to either a local person or organization for something great that they're doing. Becky, let's start with you. What have you got this week?
Okay, so I noticed it started in about mid-May, the Motown Records hashtag Motown ABCs. So, of course, it's a nod to the Jackson 5 ABC song. So they just decided during pandemic, let's do something that really creates community, makes an impact, and kind of imparts joy. So every day they take the letter of the alphabet in a row and highlight something or do some sort of initiative. So the letter D just came up last Friday. So they said D for Detroit.
Yay.
And what they did, which of course, how fitting, Motown was founded here. So they decided to work with Brilliant Detroit, which, if you don't know, is a nonprofit. They support education, health, social services within the city. Tremendous organization. So Motown Records partner with Brilliant Detroit to provide 2,000 home learning kits for Detroit's kids. So includes like vocabulary lessons, things that are, printed out. So even if you don't have access to computers, it's right there. It's like a self-contained kit. Even includes masks, some disinfecting materials for the home. And I just think that's such an impactful thing where we have all these kids. It addresses a lot of inadequate things going on with education. So they're doing that. They're also giving $800 grants throughout this process, which $800 is kind of a nod to that's what Berry Gordy started the label with.
That's right.
Now, my thought was, shouldn't inflation have raised that? But hey, $800 is still a lot.
Symbolism matters.
Symbolism matters. So, somebody getting that grant is the likes of Hot Sam's, the longtime clothing retailer here in the city. So that's my shout out. And you can find out all about it and follow their social media with the hashtag Motown ABCs.
I like that they're doing that because Motown has just been such an easy thing. My girlfriend's got grandkids, and when they're over, it's so easy to just say, Alexa, play Motown.
Oh,
and we know that everything is kid friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that I like to mention all the time, have you seen the cartoon Motown Magic that Netflix has?
No. Oh, wait. Yes, I have. I have not. I've seen the browser. Like, okay, that's something to watch.
Watch it.
Okay.
It's fantastic. It's really good because they take all the old Motown songs and they turn it into and it's based in a city that's basically Detroit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at that tonight.
It's very cute.
It is really well done. All right, Rochelle, how about you? Anybody you want to give a shout out to?
I want to thank Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because for The Burden, he said that it was one of the most comprehensive, enlightening, and thought-provoking books I've ever read on African-American history, which made my life. But my shout out is to the Detroit Police Department. The DPD has handled the protest situation and the stuff that's going on here with amazing aplomb. But Deputy Police Chief Todd Bettison last night kneeled with protesters. And that was one of the most moving things I've ever seen. And it reminds us here that our police department is not like the departments where they had police shootings and incidents and stuff for years. We have not had that here. We've not had the national media all converge because of something that happened here with our DPD. So I just want to really thank them for, what they're doing. Are there a few mistakes? Maybe, but the first thing you got was an apology. And the second thing you got was a pledge that it wouldn't happen again. Everybody doesn't do that. So thanks to our guys in blue.
It's been interesting to watch this because we have seen different responses in different cities. Some examples of some things going really, really well. I think about Flint as well. Genesee County and the sheriff there who went and I think it was the sheriff marched with.
It was the sheriff. He said, let's walk. I wish he'd been wearing a mask, but I still loved him.
Yes, yeah. I wish he was wearing a mask.
But it was a beautiful moment. Yeah.
Yes. And then we've seen some less than beautiful moments in all this too.
Like the cops in Van Nuys who arrested the people who were trying to flag them down to get some looters, and they arrested the people who flagged them down.
And in Atlanta, the tasers in the car.
Pulling out 2 college students. It's like, really? They were fired, but how many times do you have to fire somebody before you decide, let's hire guys who don't do that?
Exactly.
So, thankfully nothing like that's coming out of Detroit.
That's right.
Good. Well, I want to give a shout out to as well. My shout out is to artist Sydney James.
Yes.
I just read about this in the Metro Times. I did not know this story. I did not know about Malice Green because I'm not from here. Becky, you know this story?
Oh, very well. It was 1992, and I remember actually where I was, and I remember the case and when the officers were, convicted and sentenced. Yeah, very clearly.
So Malice Green was a guy who, in his 30s, was killed by 2 white police officers. He was an African American. This was in November of 1992, so you can imagine this is not long after the Rodney King riots. And
yeah, a few months. It was a few
yeah,
months.
everything was still really tense. Going back and reading through the story, there are a lot of similarities between his story and what we're seeing today, and it's kind of shocking because it makes you realize maybe we haven't come very far since 1992. The cops were sent to prison. 2 of them were. 3 of them were acquitted. And one of the similarities between these stories was actually the autopsies. That was something that I noticed.
Yes.
There were multiple autopsies, and different autopsies pointed the finger in different directions. And so what Sydney James is going to do is she's an artist who is creating a mural. She's raised money on GoFundMe. Her goal was 10,000. She's way over that, almost double that. She actually said she might take some of the extra money and use it as to help out people who are arrested in the Black Lives Matter protests. But she's going to create a mural. There was a mural dedicated to Malice Green, but it was demolished in 2013. So she's creating a new one. It's going to be over at the Hamilton Tucker Gallery close to Highland Park. And one of the things that she's going to do with it is she's going to include the names of people who have been lynched or been victims of police brutality over the years. So she's putting that all together. So I wanted to give a shout out to her, Sydney James.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting too, because one of her murals in Eastern Market also has a list, and it says the definitive list of Black people that feel safe in America. You know what makes, and of course the list is blank.
Right.
So then to have the new mural with the list honoring the actual names of people who have suffered in that way it's really powerful. She's a tremendous artist in the city. Talk about
She
a
is
national
a
treasure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, that's shout outs. Rochelle, hey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really, it's been great to have you on. It's exciting
Yes.
to hear about all the projects that you've got going on, even in the midst of everything that we're all dealing with. Really, thank you for being here, for being a part
Thank
of it.
you so much. This was awesome. I'll be glad to come back anytime, and I'll be sure and let you know what's happening with the ACE office, because we're your ACE downtown.
Yeah, it sounds like you have an open door policy, and so
Yes, I
thanks
do.
for sharing that with us.
And we have your cell phone number.
Call anytime, anytime.
And by the same token, you're welcome anytime. I mean, we've been doing this podcast, and it's all about the Detroit arts and entertainment scene. So
I did it again. I yanked the cord.
Oh.
I've got to get some wireless headphones.
We would just, hopefully next time we see you, we'll see you in person, and we can sit down and.
Oh, that would be
this.
awesome.
So
We can overcome this live stream Zoom fatigue
We've been
eventually.
doing great. This was beautiful, and we all look so good. I mean, I'm so clear, and you're so clear. This is good.
we
It
built
does
this
feel
beautiful studio. We were about to start doing video like 2 weeks before all this happened.
Well, hey, I got that beat. I started an Office of Arts and Culture, and COVID
Right. You know
happened.
how it
Right.
is.
Yeah, I
So,
think Rochelle wins. She wins that one. Mhm.
Thank
All
you
right.
again
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Until next time, Detroit's moving.
Keep up.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.